The summer tasted of chlorine and coconut-scented sunscreen. It was a chemical cocktail that clung to my skin, my clothes, my hair, a constant reminder of where I was. Poolside, perpetually on the periphery. My official title was pool attendant, a gloriously vague term that mostly meant I folded towels, skimmed leaves from the water's surface, and told children not to run. Mostly, though, my job was to watch. I watched the suburban mothers in their wide-brimmed hats, the gaggles of teenagers performing elaborate cannonballs, the toddlers shrieking in the shallow end. And I watched Mason. Mason was the head lifeguard. He was everything I was not: confident, bronzed, effortlessly athletic. He moved with an easy grace that seemed to command the space around him, whether he was striding along the concrete deck or climbing into the high chair that made him look like a king surveying his sun-drenched kingdom. He had a smile that was a little crooked, a little cocky, and it sent a stupid, frantic flutter through my chest every time he aimed it, however briefly, in my general direction. I'd spent the better part of June and all of July cataloging the nuances of that smile, the way it tightened at the corners when he was annoyed, the way it softened when a kid scraped a knee and came to him for a cartoon-themed bandage. My life was a study in quiet observation. I lived in a state of muted gray, a holding pattern of college classes I wasn't passionate about, and a future that felt as formless as a cloud. The pool was my splash of color, and Mason was the most vibrant shade in the palette. I told myself it was just a summer crush, an idle fantasy to pass the long, hot hours. He was, by all accounts, straight. He talked about girls with the other lifeguards, vague anecdotes about dates and parties that I would overhear and meticulously file away as evidence against my own foolish heart. He was friendly to me, in the way a person is friendly to a piece of useful furniture. "Hey, Leo, can you grab the skimmer?" "Leo, towels are low." It was never more than that. I was a background character in the story of his summer. That was my normal. A predictable rhythm of sun, water, and unspoken yearning. I had accepted my role. I was content, in a resigned sort of way, to simply watch him from a safe distance, to let the fantasy play out in the quiet theater of my mind. I didn't want anything more, because wanting felt dangerous. It felt like inviting a tidal wave into my carefully constructed wading pool of a life. But the thing about weather, and about feelings, is that you don't get to choose when the storm hits. It started with the sky. One moment, it was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The next, it was bruised purple and gray along the horizon. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of rain and ozone that cut through the chemical scent of the pool. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, and Mason was instantly on his feet. His voice, usually relaxed, took on a sharp edge of command. "Everybody out of the water." Pools closed. There was a chorus of groans and complaints, but no one argued with him. He had that kind of authority. Parents grabbed their kids, teenagers snatched their phones, and a frantic energy filled the air as people rushed to gather their belongings before the heavens opened up. The other lifeguards, a pair of bubbly high school girls named Chloe and Jess, started securing the umbrellas and stacking lounge chairs. Mason pointed at me. "Leo, help me get the chemical covers on and lock up the shed." "Now," I nodded, my heart giving a familiar, stupid leap at the direct order. We worked in a frantic but efficient rhythm. The wind picked up, whipping loose towels into the air and sending the first fat drops of rain splattering against the hot concrete. They sizzled on impact. I helped him wrestle the heavy vinyl covers over the large drums of chlorine and muriatic acid stored in the open-air enclosure next to the pump room. The sky was getting darker by the second, the thunder closer, louder. "Get the rest of the loose stuff into the shed," Mason yelled over a particularly loud clap of thunder. "I'll get the gate." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a bin of pool noodles and a stack of kickboards, shoving them through the open door of the equipment shed. It was a small, windowless cinderblock room that smelled of mildew and rubber. I tossed the items inside and turned to grab a stray life vest, just as the sky ripped open. Rain came down in a solid, blinding sheet. I could barely see the main building 10 yards away. Mason was suddenly there, a dark shape moving through the deluge, shoving a large rolling bin of rescue tubes toward the shed. "Get in," he shouted, pushing the bin inside with a final heave. I scrambled in after it, dripping and shivering as the rain plastered my thin staff polo shirt to my skin. Mason followed, pulling the heavy metal door toward him. It was dark inside, the only light a dim gray rectangle from the open doorway. He was fumbling with the latch, trying to get the door to catch, when a massive gust of wind slammed it shut with a deafening boom that echoed in the small space. We were plunged into almost total darkness. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain hammering on the metal roof and our own ragged breathing. I could feel the cold concrete floor through the thin soles of my sneakers. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and old vinyl. I could hear Mason shifting beside me, his silhouette barely visible against the faint line of light under the door. "Well," he said, his voice startlingly close in the dark. "That's not ideal." He tried the handle. It turned, but the door didn't budge. He pushed against it with his shoulder. Nothing. A metallic rattle from the outside told us everything we needed to know. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, his voice a low growl of frustration. He banged his fist against the metal, a loud, hollow thud. "Hey, anyone out there?" Silence. Only the roar of the storm answered. Chloe and Jess must have seen us go in and, in their haste to get out of the rain, slid the heavy bolt lock on the outside, assuming we were right behind them. It was a simple mistake. A catastrophic, mortifying mistake. We were locked in. Together. My heart, which had been hammering from the adrenaline of the storm, began to beat a new, frantic rhythm. A rhythm of pure, unadulterated panic. I was trapped in a small, dark box with the one person on Earth who could unravel me with a single glance. My carefully maintained distance was gone, obliterated by a freak summer storm and a misplaced bolt. The air felt thin, hard to draw into my lungs. The darkness felt vast and suffocating all at once. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the distinct scent of his sunscreen, a mix of coconut and something clean, something uniquely Mason, now mingled with the smell of rain. He sighed, a heavy sound of resignation in the dark. He leaned his back against the door, and I heard the faint squeak of his wet sneakers on the concrete as he shifted his weight. I stood frozen, a few feet away, trying to make myself as small as possible, as if I could somehow disappear into the shadows. But in a room this small, there were no shadows deep enough. "Guess we're stuck here for a bit," he said. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the frantic symphony playing in my chest. Of course he was calm. He was Mason. He was probably cataloging emergency procedures in his head, figuring out the most logical way to handle the situation. I, on the other hand, was cataloging all the ways I could possibly embarrass myself in the next 5 minutes. "Yeah," I managed to squeak out. My voice sounded thin and reedy. "I guess so." I tried to control my breathing, to slow the frantic pace of my thoughts. It was just a room. He was just a guy whose shoulder I could probably touch if I just reached out my hand. A guy whose presence filled the tiny space, making it feel charged and impossibly intimate. My entire summer of careful observation had been just that, observation. I had studied him from afar, like a distant star, beautiful and unreachable. Now that star was in the same small, dark room, and I was terrified I was about to get burned. He shifted again, and I heard the rustle of his wet shorts against his skin. "Not a lot of room in here," he commented, his voice still even. It was a simple statement of fact. The shed was cluttered with bins, shelves of chemicals, and oversized equipment. We were standing in the only clear spot, a small patch of concrete no bigger than a welcome mat. My mind went blank. All my carefully constructed internal monologues, all my witty comebacks I'd imagined in my daydreams, they all evaporated. I was left with a single, blaring thought. He's so close. I was acutely aware of every tiny sound. The drip of water from my hair onto the floor. The soft hiss of his breath. The frantic, traitorous thumping of my own heart, which I was sure he could hear. I wrapped my arms around myself, partly because I was cold, but mostly to have something to hold on to. He must have heard my teeth chattering. "You cold?" he asked. There was a subtle shift in his tone, a hint of something softer, something that wasn't just head lifeguard assessing a situation. "A little," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. There was another pause, a stretch of silence filled only by the storm. I stood rigidly, my muscles tensed, waiting for, I don't know what. For him to laugh it off. For him to make a joke. For him to retreat further into his side of the darkness. Instead, I felt him move. It was a small shift, a subtle adjustment of his weight. My senses were so heightened that I could feel the air stir as he moved closer. We were already standing near each other, but this was a deliberate closing of the gap. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the warmth of his body before he even touched me. Then, his shoulder brushed against mine. It was the barest of contacts, the damp fabric of his polo against the equally damp fabric of mine. But it sent a jolt through my entire system, a spark of electricity that lit up every nerve ending. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to apologize, to create space. It was an accident. It had to be an accident. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the simple, shocking reality of his proximity. We stood there for a long moment, shoulder to shoulder in the suffocating dark. The world outside, with its hammering rain and rolling thunder, seemed to fade away. My entire universe shrank to the single point of contact between us. I focused on the feeling of his solid presence next to me, the steady strength in his shoulder, the heat seeping through our wet shirts. Then he nudged me. A gentle, deliberate pressure. It wasn't a jostle or a stumble. It was an invitation. My brain short-circuited. Every assumption I had ever made about him, every carefully constructed wall I had built around my feelings, began to crumble. This didn't fit the narrative. The cool, confident, straight lifeguard didn't do this. My internal monologue was a frantic, looping question mark. What is happening? What does this mean? Is this real? As if sensing my confusion, my silent, screaming panic, he spoke. His voice was low, a soft rumble that vibrated through his shoulder into mine, a sound meant only for me. Closer's fine. And with those two words, the world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a permission, an absolution. All the anxiety that had been coiling in my gut didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It morphed into a thrilling, terrifying hum. He wasn't pushing me away. He was pulling me in. My own shoulder, which had been tense and rigid, relaxed into his, accepting the contact, leaning into the warmth. Closer was fine. It was more than fine. It was everything. The minutes stretched into an eternity, measured not by the clock, but by the rhythm of our breathing. We stood in the shared darkness, connected by that single line of contact, our shoulders pressed together. The storm raged outside, a wild and chaotic counterpoint to the profound stillness that had fallen inside the shed. My mind, usually a hive of frantic overthinking, had gone quiet. It was as if his simple declaration had silenced the noise, leaving only a profound and startling awareness of the present moment. I became a cartographer of sensation. I mapped the solidness of his frame against mine, the way his muscles felt dense and real, not just something I'd observed from across the pool deck. I could feel the subtle rise and fall of his chest with each breath he took. The air was still thick with the smell of chlorine and rain, but now it felt less like a chemical fog and more like the atmosphere of our own private world. I tried to commit every detail to memory. The specific timbre of his voice when he'd spoken, the exact pressure of his shoulder against mine, the feeling of the cold seeping up from the concrete floor, a stark contrast to the warmth radiating from him. He hadn't said anything else, and neither had I. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full. It was weighted with everything that wasn't being said, with the sudden, shocking possibility that my entire understanding of him had been wrong. I replayed his words over and over. Closer's fine. It was so simple, so direct. It lacked the flowery prose of my daydreams, but it was infinitely more potent because it was real. It was an anchor in the swirling sea of my uncertainty. My analytical brain, refusing to stay dormant for long, began to whir again, but this time with a different purpose. It wasn't analyzing his actions to confirm my theory of his unattainability. It was re-examining every past interaction, every brief smile, every casual word, through this new, astonishing lens. Had there been other signs I'd missed? Was the way he sometimes held my gaze for a fraction of a second too long not just my imagination? Was the easy camaraderie he showed everyone else slightly different from the focused, almost watchful way he sometimes looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention? I felt a tremor of a shiver run through me again, a combination of the lingering cold and the nervous energy coursing through my veins. Instantly, I felt him shift beside me. The pressure of his shoulder increased, and he leaned into me just a fraction more. It was a protective gesture, an instinctual response to my shiver, and it made my breath hitch. This was happening. This was real. We should probably sit down, he said, his voice still low and close. No telling how long we'll be in here. Don't want to be standing the whole time. Okay, I agreed, my voice a little shaky. He moved first, detaching himself from me. The sudden loss of his warmth was immediate and acute. I felt a pang of disappointment, so sharp it was almost a physical pain. He fumbled in the dark for a moment, and I heard the scraping sound of something being dragged across the concrete. Here, he said. A dark shape materialized in front of me. It's an overturned bucket. Should be sturdy enough. I reached out tentatively, my fingers brushing against his hand as I found the cool plastic of the bucket. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent another jolt through me. Thanks. I sat down, my knees bumping against a stack of something soft, probably kickboards. I heard more scraping as he found another bucket for himself. He settled next to me, so close our knees touched. In the seated position, the intimacy of the space felt even more pronounced. We were two people huddled together on overturned buckets, surrounded by the mundane detritus of a summer job, yet it felt like the most significant place on earth. So, he started, and I could hear the hint of a smile in his voice. Of all the places to get stuck, I managed a small, nervous laugh. Yeah, not exactly the Ritz. Could be worse, he said. Could be the pump room. The noise in there would drive you insane. We fell into a surprisingly easy conversation. The darkness seemed to act as a confessional, stripping away the usual social armor we wore during our shifts. He asked me about my major in college, English literature, and didn't make the usual joke about what I planned to do with it. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested. So you like stories, he said. I guess, I replied. I like understanding why people do the things they do. What motivates them? And what have you figured out? He asked. His knee pressed a little more firmly against mine. The question caught me off guard. It was deeper than the usual small talk. That most people are just trying their best, I said, the words coming out before I had a chance to filter them. And that they're usually more scared than they let on. I felt his gaze on me in the dark. Yeah, he said softly. I think you're right about that. He told me about his own plans, or lack thereof. He was studying business, but he wasn't sure it was what he wanted. He talked about a road trip he'd taken with his dad the summer before, out to see the national parks in Utah and Arizona. He described the vastness of the desert, the silence, the feeling of being small under a sky full of stars. As he spoke, the image I had of him, the popular, confident jock, began to dissolve, replaced by someone more thoughtful, more complex, someone with his own uncertainties. Sometimes I just want to get in my truck and drive, he admitted, his voice quiet. Just go somewhere where nobody knows me. Start fresh. It was a confession of vulnerability so unexpected that it left me speechless for a moment. This was a side of Mason no one at the pool ever saw. This was not the king in his lifeguard chair. This was a young man wrestling with the same formless future that haunted me. What would you do? I asked, my voice hushed. I don't know, he said with a short, humorless laugh. Work on a ranch. Be a park ranger. Anything other than sitting in a cubicle staring at spreadsheets for the next 40 years, he paused. What about you? What do you really want to do, Leo? No one had ever asked me that before. Not really. They asked what I was studying, what my career plans were, but not what I wanted. The truth rose in my throat, a raw and honest thing I'd never dared to speak aloud. I want to write, I said, but I don't think I have anything interesting to say. I think you do, he said immediately, with a conviction that startled me. You're always watching. You see things other people don't. My heart squeezed. He saw me. He actually saw me. I wasn't just a piece of furniture or a background character. I was the quiet observer, and he, the object of my observation, had been observing me right back. The realization was staggering. It recontextualized everything. The rain on the roof began to soften, its frantic drumming easing into a steady, rhythmic patter. The thunder had moved on, leaving a quiet intimacy in its wake. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the space between us filled with our shared confessions. The initial shock of being trapped had given way to a strange sense of peace. I didn't want it to end. I could have sat there with him on an overturned bucket in the dark forever. I must have shivered again, because he spoke, his voice pulling me from my reverie. Still cold. A little, I confessed. My shirt was still damp and clinging unpleasantly to my skin. There was a rustling sound, and then he was moving. He stood up, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was moving away. Instead, he reached for something on a high shelf. I heard the soft, plush sound of fabric unfolding. "Here," he said, his voice directly above me. Something soft and dry landed on my shoulders. It was a towel. Not one of the thin, scratchy white towels we gave to the pool patrons, but a thick, dark blue beach towel. His personal towel. It smelled faintly of him, of that clean, coconut scent, and it was blissfully warm and dry. I pulled it tighter around my shoulders, burying my face in the soft cotton. "Thanks, Mason." "No problem." He didn't sit back down on his own bucket. Instead, he sat on the edge of mine, right next to me. The bucket was small, and the move forced him to press his entire side against me, from my shoulder all the way down to my thigh. The towel was draped over both of us now, a shared canopy. My breathing hitched. This was a new level of proximity, a deliberate, unambiguous closeness that made my head spin. His arm was pressed against mine, skin on skin where my short sleeve ended. I could feel the wiry strength in his forearm, the warmth of his blood just beneath the surface. I was hyper-aware of his leg against mine, the solid muscle of his thigh a stark contrast to my own skinny frame. He draped an arm over my shoulders, pulling the towel more securely around us. It was a casual gesture, yet it felt monumental. His fingers rested lightly on my arm, his thumb stroking absently back and forth against my bicep. Every tiny movement sent a cascade of sparks down my spine. This is it. This is the moment where I wake up. But I didn't wake up. The feeling of his arm around me, the weight of it, the impossible comfort of it, was undeniably real. My body, which had been coiled with tension, began to relax against my will. I leaned into his side, resting my head tentatively against his shoulder. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. If anything, his arm tightened slightly, drawing me closer. My mind was a whirlwind. How could I have been so wrong about him? The signs I had interpreted as friendly indifference were perhaps something else entirely, a quiet curiosity, a hesitant interest he didn't know how to express. This straight guy I had built up in my head was a fiction, a projection of my own fears and insecurities. The Real Mason was here, sitting next to me in the dark, his thumb drawing lazy circles on my arm. He turned his head slightly, and I could feel his breath ghost across my hair. "You okay, Leo?" he asked, his voice a low murmur against my ear. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, pressing my face deeper into the crook of his neck and shoulder. I inhaled his scent, a heady mix of rain, sunscreen, and something that was just him. It was intoxicating. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. We sat like that for what felt like a lifetime. The world outside ceased to exist. There was no pool, no summer job, no uncertain future. There was only the darkness, the sound of the rain, and the solid, comforting weight of him next to me. The tension that had been a constant companion in my chest for as long as I could remember finally, blessedly, began to unwind. It was Mason who finally broke the silence, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through me. "You're always watching everyone, Leo." It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple observation, delivered with a soft curiosity that made my stomach flutter. "What do you see when you look at me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. It was the tipping point. There was no way to deflect, no way to hide. The darkness that had been a shield now felt like a spotlight, illuminating the deepest corners of my heart. My mind raced, searching for an answer that was honest but not terrifying, true but not reckless. I could give him a safe, platonic answer. "I see a good leader. I see someone everyone respects." But that felt like a lie, a betrayal of this strange, fragile intimacy we had built in the dark. My throat was dry. I swallowed hard, the sound loud in the quiet shed. His thumb had stopped its lazy circles on my arm. He was waiting. The silence stretched, and I knew I had to fill it. "I see." I started, my voice cracking. I took a shaky breath and tried again. "I see someone who seems sure of himself. Someone who knows what he wants." It was a partial truth, a safe place to start. "Do I?" he asked, his voice laced with a gentle irony. "Because I spend most of my time feeling like I'm just treading water." His admission, another crack in his confident facade, gave me a surge of courage. He wasn't just asking a question. He was opening a door. He was inviting me to be as honest as he was being. I lifted my head from his shoulder, turning to face him in the near-total darkness. I couldn't make out his features clearly, only the dark shape of his silhouette against the faint light from under the door. But I could feel his gaze on me, intense and unwavering. "When I look at you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I see someone I can't stop thinking about." The words were out. They hung in the small space between us, terrifying and liberating. I had finally said it. Not the whole truth, not the "I'm half in love with you" part, but enough. It was more honesty than I had shown anyone in years. I held my breath, bracing for the impact, for the awkward laugh, the sudden withdrawal of his arm, the chilling return of the distance between us. Instead, he was silent for a beat. Then he moved. The hand that was resting on my arm slid down to my elbow, his grip firm but gentle. His other hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking softly against my cheek. His skin was warm, slightly calloused, and the touch was electrifying. It was an answer more eloquent than any words could be. "Good," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "Because I have the same problem." My heart stopped. It literally felt like it seized in my chest, and then restarted with a painful, powerful jolt. The same problem. He had been watching me, thinking about me, the same way I had been. The beautiful, unattainable star had been looking back at me the whole time. The relief was so profound, so overwhelming, it felt like I might shatter. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I was rooted to the spot, leaning into his touch, my entire being focused on the shrinking space between our lips. My eyes fluttered shut. This couldn't be real. It was a fantasy, a dream conjured by the storm and the darkness. And then his lips met mine. It wasn't like the kisses in movies. There was no swell of music, no dramatic crescendo. It was quiet and tentative and breathtakingly real. His lips were soft, tasting faintly of salt from the rain. It started as just a gentle pressure, a question. I answered by pressing back, a silent confirmation. His hand tightened on my jaw, tilting my head slightly as the kiss deepened. It was slow, unhurried, a conversation without words. It spoke of curiosity, of longing, of a relief so profound it was almost painful. My hands, which had been clenched in my lap, came up to rest on his chest. I could feel the steady, rapid beat of his heart under my palm, a mirror of my own. He wasn't just calm, cool Mason anymore. He was as affected by this as I was. The kiss was honest. It wasn't for show, it wasn't a performance. It was just us, in the dark, finally closing a distance that had felt impossibly vast only an hour before. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathless. He didn't move away. He rested his forehead against mine, our noses brushing. His hand was still on my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. We stayed like that, just breathing each other's air, our heartbeats gradually slowing to a matching rhythm. "Leo," he whispered, his voice rough. "Yeah." I breathed back. "I've wanted to do that for a long time." And just like that, the last of my crumbling walls turned to dust. A long time. It wasn't just the storm. It wasn't just the forced proximity. This had been building, quietly, under the surface of our mundane summer interactions, and I had been completely oblivious. Before I could respond, a loud scraping sound from outside made us both jump. A rectangle of muddy, gray light flooded the shed as the door was yanked open. We sprang apart, our hearts pounding for an entirely new reason. Chloe stood there, silhouetted against the rainy afternoon, her hand still on the bolt. "Oh my God, you guys. We are so sorry. We thought you were behind us, and with the storm and everything, we just locked up and ran. Just realized you never came into the office." We blinked at her, disoriented by the sudden light and the intrusion. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. We had been sitting so close. What had she seen? Mason recovered first. He stood up, running a hand through his damp hair in a gesture that looked remarkably casual. "It's fine, Chloe. No big deal. Glad you found us." His voice was steady, betraying none of the earth-shattering intimacy of the moment before. He was already back in his role. Head lifeguard Mason. In control. I, on the other hand, felt exposed and raw. I scrambled to my feet, avoiding Chloe's gaze, my mind reeling. The real world had come crashing back in, loud and unwelcome. The bubble had burst. We walked out of the shed into the cool, rain-washed air. The storm had passed, leaving behind dripping trees and the clean smell of wet earth. It felt like stepping into a different world. Nothing looked the same. Everything was sharper, more vivid. Mason clapped me on the shoulder, a friendly, public gesture that felt both reassuring and agonizingly distant after what had just happened. "See you tomorrow, Leo," he said, giving Chloe a nod before heading toward the staff parking lot. I just stood there, watching him walk away, the thick, warm towel still clutched in my hands. It still smelled like him. The kiss, his confession, the impossible warmth of his body next to mine. It all felt like a fever dream. And as I watched his truck pull out of the lot, a cold, familiar dread began to creep back in. What if it was just the storm? What if, in the light of day, he regretted it all? The next morning, the world was painfully bright. The sun beat down on the freshly washed concrete, making the puddles from yesterday's storm steam and glitter. The air was scrubbed clean, but my own internal atmosphere was thick with a fog of anxiety. I had barely slept, my mind replaying every second in the shed, dissecting every word, every touch, searching for flaws in the memory, for signs that I had misinterpreted everything. Getting ready for work felt like preparing for a final exam I hadn't studied for. I changed my shirt 3 times. I stared at my reflection, seeing the same pale, unremarkable face as always. Why would someone like Mason, someone who could have anyone, be interested in me? The logic of it didn't hold up in the harsh light of day. The darkness of the shed had been a magical, liminal space where the impossible felt real. But the morning was just the morning. When I arrived at the pool, he was already there, talking to Jess by the lifeguard stand. He was laughing, leaning against the white metal frame with that easy confidence that I had always found so intimidating. My stomach twisted into a knot. He looked completely normal, unchanged. He glanced over, saw me, and his smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. He gave me a small, tight-lipped nod before turning his attention back to Jess. That was it. The nod. Not a smile, not a wave, just a curt, almost dismissive acknowledgement. The cold dread that had started the night before bloomed into full-blown panic. I was right. It was a mistake. A weird, situational fluke that he now deeply regretted. The intimacy we had shared was an illusion, a trick of the dark, and now he was embarrassed. He was going to pretend it never happened. The day was torture. I went about my tasks in a daze, my movements robotic. I folded towels, skimmed leaves, and tried to keep my eyes fixed on anything but him. But he was a magnet, and my gaze was iron filings. I couldn't help but watch him. I saw him talking to patrons, demonstrating a stroke to a kid, twirling his whistle on its lanyard. He never looked my way again. The silence between us was a physical presence, a gaping chasm that had opened up where that small, shared space had been. Every time our paths nearly crossed, one of us would veer away, finding a sudden, urgent task on the other side of the pool deck. The easy camaraderie of our previous shifts was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating awkwardness. I felt like I was wearing a neon sign that read, "I kissed the head lifeguard, and now he hates me." My internal monologue was a relentless cycle of self-recrimination. I had been stupid to say what I said. I had pushed too far, read the signals wrong. Closer's fine. Maybe he just meant physically, because the shed was small. I have the same problem. Maybe he just meant he also found it hard to focus. I was an idiot. A hopeful, romantic idiot. I had taken a moment of shared vulnerability and twisted it into something it wasn't. By the end of the day, I felt hollowed out, exhausted from the emotional whiplash. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the water. Patrons started to pack up their bags, their laughter and chatter grating on my frayed nerves. I just wanted to go home, to crawl into bed and forget the whole humiliating episode. I was in the staff room, gathering my things, my back to the door. I was moving slowly, delaying the inevitable moment when I'd have to walk past him to leave. I heard the door creak open and shut. I didn't turn around. I braced myself for the silence, for him to just grab his keys and leave without a word. "Leo." His voice was quiet, just behind me. I froze, my hand hovering over my backpack. I squeezed my eyes shut. This was it. The "let's just forget this happened" speech. I turned around slowly. He was standing by the door, blocking my exit. His expression wasn't angry or annoyed. It was uncertain, He looked almost as nervous as I felt. He wasn't looking at my eyes, but at a spot somewhere on the floor between us. Today was weird, he said, his voice low. Yeah, I mumbled, my gaze also fixed on the floor. I'm sorry about that, he continued, finally looking up and meeting my eyes. His gaze was intense, searching. I didn't know how to act. In front of everyone. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. He wasn't ignoring me out of regret. He was ignoring me out of confusion. The knot in my stomach loosened just a little. I get it, I said, and I did. Our world in the shed had been private. The world of the pool was public, with unspoken rules and expectations. He took a step closer, closing some of the distance between us. He started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. It was the same gesture from the day before, but this time it felt different. Less casual, more anxious. I don't want you to think that last night, that it was just because we were stuck in there. My heart started to beat a little faster, a hopeful rhythm this time. Okay, I said softly, encouraging him to continue. It wasn't a mistake, Leo, he said, his voice firm, resolute. And I wasn't just saying things. I meant it. All of it. He took another step, and now he was standing right in front of me, so close I could see the faint flecks of gold in his brown eyes. He reached out and gently took my hand. His fingers were warm and strong as they laced through mine. It was a simple, deliberate touch, a quiet reassurance that felt more powerful than any grand declaration. I'm not good at this, he admitted, a faint blush coloring his tanned cheeks. Figuring this stuff out. I've never done this before. The honesty in his voice, the raw vulnerability, broke through the last of my fear. He was just as new to this as I was. He was just as scared. Me neither, I confessed, squeezing his hand. A real smile, the first one all day, touched my lips. So I guess we're even. He smiled back, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made my chest ache in the best possible way. Good, he said. Can we talk later? For real? Not here. Yeah, I said, my voice full of a relief so profound it felt like I could float. I'd like that. I'll text you, he said, giving my hand one last squeeze before letting go. He grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. And Leo? Yeah. For what it's worth, he said, pausing at the door and looking back at me, his expression serious. I see a writer. You just have to believe it. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the quiet staff room, my hand still tingling where he had held it. The fog of anxiety had lifted, replaced by a bright, terrifying, wonderful hope. It wasn't a dream. It was real, and it was just beginning. A few days later, a new, tentative rhythm established itself. At work, we were careful. We maintained a professional distance, but the agonizing awkwardness was gone, replaced by something else. It was a current of awareness that flowed between us, a secret knowledge that colored our every interaction. A shared glance across the pool deck held a world of meaning. A brief, seemingly accidental brush of our hands, as he passed me a cleaning supply, sent a jolt through both of us. It was a silent conversation, a promise of later. The real test came one afternoon during a lull. Jess and Chloe were gossiping near the concession stand, and another lifeguard, a loud, obnoxious guy from the morning shift named Kyle, was hanging around. He was recounting a story from the previous weekend, punctuating it with crude jokes. I was nearby, ostensibly cleaning the filter baskets, but really just trying to remain invisible. Kyle made a lazy, derogatory comment involving a gay couple he'd seen at a restaurant. It was the kind of casual bigotry I was used to hearing, the kind I usually just absorbed and let slide off me, leaving a faint, slimy residue of shame and anger. Chloe giggled uncomfortably, but Jess just rolled her eyes. I tensed, my knuckles white on the plastic basket, and I chanced to look at Mason. He was standing a few feet away, coiling a rope. His back was to me, but I could see the line of his shoulders go rigid. He didn't turn around. He just stopped what he was doing and said, his voice calm but cold as ice, "That's not funny, Kyle." The air went still. Kyle, caught off guard, stammered, "What?" "It was just a joke, man." "It wasn't," Mason repeated, still not looking at him. He resumed coiling the rope with slow, deliberate motions. "Find something better to talk about." The dismissal was absolute. There was no room for argument. Kyle mumbled something under his breath and shuffled away. Chloe and Jess quickly found something else to do. The moment passed. But for me, it was monumental. Mason hadn't made a grand speech. He hadn't started a fight. He had simply, quietly, drawn a line in the sand. He had defended me without ever looking at me, without anyone else even knowing that's what he was doing. He had made the space safe. In that moment, watching the set of his shoulders, I felt a wave of affection so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. That night, he texted me, my place, for that talk. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type a reply. Yeah, send me the address. He lived in a small, slightly messy apartment above a garage a few towns over. It smelled like laundry detergent and leftover pizza. It was completely, utterly normal, and therefore perfect. We sat on his lumpy couch, a foot of space between us, the television playing a baseball game on mute. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the potential of what this night could mean. He was the one who broke the silence. So, he said, turning to face me. This is weird. Yeah, I agreed, a nervous laugh escaping me. A little. I like you, Leo, he said, the words direct and simple, leaving no room for misinterpretation. I think I have for a while. I just didn't know what to do about it. I've never felt this way about a guy before. I like you too, I said, the words feeling ridiculously inadequate. Felt like a word for pizza or a movie, not for this massive, life-altering feeling that had taken over my entire existence. For a really long time. He smiled, a small, relieved smile. Yeah? I kind of figured. The way you used to watch me. It was either that or you were planning my murder. I laughed, and the last of the tension in the room dissipated. The thought never crossed my mind. I lied, and he laughed with me. He closed the distance between us on the couch, taking my hand in his again. It felt familiar now, right? So what do we do? He asked, his expression open and earnest. How does this work? I have no idea, I admitted. I guess we just figure it out. Together. Okay, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. Okay, I can do that. He leaned in and kissed me again. This time it was different from the shed. It was just as gentle, but it wasn't fueled by the shock of a first confession. This was a kiss of intention, of decision. It was the first sentence of a new story we were about to write together. We didn't do much more than that. We talked for hours. We ordered another pizza. We sat close on the couch, his arm around me, and watched the rest of the baseball game, not really paying attention. It was simple. It was quiet. And it was the happiest I had ever been. There was no grand, cinematic moment of revelation, just a slow, steady dawning of a new reality. The summer began to wind down. The days grew shorter, the angle of the sun lower in the sky. The pool, once a hub of frantic energy, became quieter. Our secret wasn't a secret anymore, not really. We didn't announce it, but we stopped hiding it. We'd leave work together. He'd bring me a coffee in the morning. He'd rest his hand on the small of my back as we walked. The other lifeguards noticed. Chloe and Jess were sweet about it, offering knowing smiles. Kyle just avoided us. It didn't matter. Their opinions were background noise. All that mattered was the quiet, solid reality of Mason's hand in mine. Our last day at the pool was bittersweet. We went through the familiar motions of closing down for the season, stacking the last of the chairs, draining the water, locking the gates for the final time. The place looked stark and lonely without the laughter and the splashing. We ended up at the shed. The door was propped open, and we were tasked with taking final inventory. It was strange to be back in the place where everything had changed, but this time in the full light of day. The space that had felt so claustrophobic and charged now just looked like a messy storage room. Hard to believe this is where it started, I said, running my hand over one of the overturned buckets. Mason came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. Best storm ever, he murmured into my ear. I leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my back. We have to go back to school soon, I said quietly. Our universities were 2 hours apart. A new kind of uncertainty loomed on the horizon. I know, he said. He was silent for a moment. It's 2 hours. It's not the other side of the world. We can make it work. Weekends. Breaks. He turned me around to face him, his hands holding my arms. I want to make it work, Leo. Do you? Yeah, I said without a second of hesitation. I really do. He smiled, that crooked, wonderful smile that still made my heart skip a beat. Good. He leaned down and gave me a soft, lingering kiss. right there in the open doorway of the shed. It was a kiss full of promise, a promise of autumns and winters to come, a promise that this wasn't just a summer fling born out of a thunderstorm. We finished our work and walked to our cars in the empty parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful. He stopped me before I got into my car. "Hey," he said, "I'm not driving back to my place tonight. I'm going up to my family's cabin to help my dad with some stuff for a few days." "Oh," I said, a little disappointed. "Okay, it's about an hour from your school," he said, a hopeful look in his eyes. "You should come up this weekend. I'll be there alone after Friday." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, worn key. He pressed it into my palm. "Just in case you get there before me." I stared at the key, its metal cool against my skin. It was more than a key. It was a commitment, an invitation into his life, into his future. I closed my hand around it, my heart feeling too big for my chest. "I'll be there," I said. He grinned and pulled me into a hug, a real, tight hug that lifted me off my feet for a second. "I'll see you Friday, Ryder," he whispered, before finally letting me go. I drove home with the windows down, the cool evening air rushing in. The key was safe in my pocket. I thought about the man I was at the beginning of the summer, quiet, invisible, afraid to want anything. And I thought about the man I was now. I was still quiet, but I no longer felt invisible, and I wasn't afraid anymore. I realized that love wasn't a lightning strike, not really. It wasn't a tidal wave. It was quieter than that. It was the slow, steady shift of the tide. It was the patient observation from across a crowded space. It was the unexpected vulnerability in a dark room. It was the courage to say, "Me too." It was the feeling of a shoulder pressing against yours, a low voice in the dark giving you permission to move closer. It was the profound, startling, life-changing realization that closer was fine. It was knowing, deep in my bones, that I had finally come home.